So Scott and I are going to chat on how to get marketing and sales speaking the same language. Now, you might be wondering, why do I see Chewbacca and C-3PO on here? And normally when I'm sitting at my home, you'll see pictures of both of them behind me. And the reason why that is, between marketing and sales, it's always like that constant finger pointing between a brother and a sister. Like, it's always somebody pointing the finger saying, you know what, it's your fault. You do this wrong. I do that wrong, and just keep playing that game. And so what ends up happening, though, is when you think about marketing and sales, is at the end of the day, we're speaking different languages. And Chewbacca in this case is the guy who just barks orders and speaks one language. And you've got C-3PO who speaks 6,000 languages. Now, the argument can be made either way. You can decide who's who between marketing and sales. So in the next slide, if you jump to that, Scott, you'll see we've labeled ourselves. This by no means means that Scott barks one language and that's marketing, and sales is to speak 6,000 languages and the smart one. That is certainly not the case. The point being is that, between the both of us, we're constantly playing these roles, and neither one of us, even though one can speak 6,000 languages, neither one of us communicate in the same one.
I always remind Matt that when C-3PO gets pulled apart, it's Chewbacca that puts him back together and carries him out. So marketing's always there to support you, buddy.
That's a good point. So, so at the end of the day, what we're going to talk about today is the consistent theme that we see. There often exists a disconnect between marketing and sales teams. And, Scott and I both come from a practitioner lens as well as on the consulting side now. So we'll do some quick intros and then we'll jump into it and get to the content. So again, my name is Matt Ward. I'm managing director and partner at Boston Consulting Group. I've got a tremendous amount of sales experience throughout my career. Did Series A startup Everbridge from Series A through IPO, did anything you can think of sales related, and then took that knowledge that I learned to BCG, where we do consulting from PE backed and VC backed startups all the way through Fortune 10 companies. So I've got a couple clients that are actually Fortune 10 companies, and so it doesn't matter how big or small you are, we're coming across the same problems, right? It's always this constant finger pointing between marketing and sales, and so that's a bit about me. I'll pass it over to Scott.
Great. Awesome. Thanks, Matt. Thanks, everybody. I'm going to be playing Chewbacca today. My name is Scott Rhodes, Associate Director here at BCG. Like Matt, I come into BCG with a pretty deep background from the marketing side. I've started agencies, built them, sold them. I've done branding work at Universal McCann, large digital work at Razorfish. I one time sat on the advisory board at ExactTarget when I started the CRM practice at Razorfish. My background covers a lot of everything from pretty deep in MarTech, understandings of how do we take marketing, think about first party data, build marketing programs and strategies around scalability. Right, which is really at the heart of a lot of where we see marketing and demand capabilities today. Is how do I build marketing programs that are scalable beyond just ABM, which is very personal, one-to-one. How do I think about my broader audience? So throughout my career, I've helped a number of clients, like Matt, working with everything from Fortune 10 all the way down to startups, helping them begin to tackle this problem. And one of the things that Matt and I really do a lot of work with is really sitting at that intersection between marketing and sales, helping clients really think about how they can begin to build better connectivity between those organizations and build better alignment so we can speak the same language. So that's kind of a little bit that we're going to kind of run through today. So some of the kind of fun part, and I think we've all heard this, right, is these things that we hear from our clients, these things that we hear from within our organizations. This, like Matt says, this finger pointing, or just really kind of saying, hey, look, this is not in my domain. But this really comes back to this disconnection between these marketing and sales organizations, right? Where we see them we're talking about the same thing, but we're not speaking about it in the same way. And so one of these kind of areas of misalignment we kind of run through is like starting at the point of classification. How do we think about our best clients? What are our strategic accounts? And one of the things that we hear from marketing on marketing side all the time is, sales is classifying everything as a strategic account, right? We've walked into clients where we've seen thousands of accounts locked up in their strategic account list, right? And that's virtually impossible to build an ABM program or something like that around that. So we also see this challenge around leads, right? And how leads are being transferred and passed off. Marketing, we hear it all the time. Hey, we're sending these leads, we're sending opportunities to sales, and we never hear back from them, right? We don't even know if they're following up on them. That's a huge, huge challenge, right? Immediately, another point of disconnection. One of the things that we always hear too on the marketing side is, hey man, we delivered against our MQL targets. We hit our KPI. We're not responsible about revenue. That's a sales area of responsibility. That's crazy, absolutely crazy. And it's something that we're going to dive into today around how we really kind of get our organizations kind of swimming all in the same way, in the same direction, towards the same goals.
Yeah, and
some of the fun things that you hear on your side.
Yeah, and in typical finger pointing fashion, right? Like for everything that marketing says, and at the end of the day, we're all in sales, so we're all really good at defending ourselves and putting blame back on somebody else. But in this case, it's like, well, great, like sure, you're going to send me a bunch of leads, but I don't even know how you score those leads today. So if I get a lead that's whether I got 4 flames or I score of 100, however you guys are scoring it, like as soon as I get that thing, it's like, well, man, this thing's a piece of garbage. Like, how the heck did you score this thing? And then, well, wait a second, you send me a bunch of MQLs, but everything's an MQL. I mean, we literally have had clients where they are sending tens of thousands of MQLs, right? So it's like, how do I treat anything differently? And then, it's like at the end of the day too, as a seller, like when I get these things that come in through the door, it's like, oh, great, here comes another tiny one. Or they sent me something that I'm already working. So great, they're going to take credit for that one. And back to Scott's last point, yeah, sure, they hit their MQL targets, but I was already working that thing. And so,
right.
So it's like this constant finger pointing and battling instead of being that symbiotic, togetherness, right, where we should be working together and really be driving towards the same thing. So that's really the topic of what we're going to cover today. Is we're going to get into a whole lot of data in typical consulting fashion as well. So we're going to get into a lot of data and really talk about some of the tactical and practical things that you guys can put together today.
Yeah, absolutely. So what we're going to start off with is, I think, one of the earlier presentations kind of made a joke about how here we see a funnel, right? And here is a direction that, absolutely no customer actually follows through in a very pure linear fashion. But understanding and locking down this is a good context as we begin to think about what are these kind of different stages that any buyer, any customer may move through, any one or all of these stages in any way. And again, it's always nonlinear. But what we're going to kind of talk about today really is what are these kind of 4 kind of core dimensions that we see across the bottom that really create opportunities for us to apply some very tactical approaches to begin to build better alignment between our 2 organizations, right? And I think it's one of the reasons that Matt and I wanted to pick this topic today, beyond Chewy and CP3O, is this is an application, or this is something that we can all apply to our business. It's really around how do we get our teams working better together, communicating better together, and swimming in that same direction. And that's something that we can all work on. It's something that we see and hear at every level of organizational size, scale, industry. So some of the things that we're going to kind of hit on today is, these 4 aspects. Number 1, kind of demand planning, right? How do we kind of come together, collaboratively begin to build more of an integrated demand strategy, tactics, and how we're going to begin to tackle this. Really define who are we going to go after and how are we going to do this, right? Qualification, right? To Matt's point, how do we get on the same page as far as how we define an opportunity? When marketing passes an opportunity over to sales, we want sales to say, yes, that is a target customer. They fit. Yes, this is the right people I would need to be talking to. And this is the right information I need to have to be able to have a good conversation with them, which leads into that 3rd point, right? Shared insights, right? This is really an incredible one that we see so many challenges with so many of our clients. And it really kind of comes back to, how do we build trust? How do we build data trust? And so addressing this idea of like, how do we consistently kind of elevate the right data and insights between our teams? And then finally, and this is one thing that Matt's going to definitely hit on, because this is one of his pet peeves, and I think one of his soapbox aspects is like shared responsibility, right? How can we think about building the right metrics, measurements, as well as getting our teams aligned on not only a shared goal, but having the shared responsibility of what we're trying to achieve? Is that a business objective of 35% growth of a specific product line in a geographical region for a specific segment? Fantastic. Marketing's on the hook for that. Sales is on the hook for that. So how do we build that shared responsibility along not only how we measure success, but how we achieve it? All right, so jumping in, I'm going to dive into each one of these real quick and have a kind of conversation as we kind of see some of the aspects and kind of give some kind of tactical advice around each one of these areas. So the first one we're going to hit on is demand planning. So one of the things that we really see here as we kind of think about demand planning, and one of the challenges that we see is, about 40% of most of the companies that we see, and we ran a survey with AAISP that identified about 40% of companies, really less than 40%, really have an effective feedback loop between their organization, between those two groups, between marketing and sales, right? So if I have these poor feedback, and there's not good communication and feedback between one another, how do we evolve? How do we get better? And how do we set a strategic plan? And that's just absolutely crazy, right? This is the fact that organizations today don't have a high cadence communication between marketing and sales, and not only how we define and set and build our plan, but how do we begin to achieve that? What does the pipeline metrics look like? How does the pipeline performing? What are we executing within that pipeline and within our teams to execute and build that pipeline? So making sure that we have that good communication. So this really kind of comes to these kind of 4 key points that we're going to hit on, right? Number one, start from the top, right? Let's build organizational kind of OKRs or objectives. This builds alignment around senior leadership of what we're trying to achieve. And then we can begin to build from those strategic objectives. What are those operational goals as we think about pipeline? And then tactical goals as far as how are we going to begin to achieve and build that pipeline. So starting from the top and working down through and building nesting objectives through each one of those stages. Second point is really, we've heard a lot about this today, ABM, right? And ABM can mean 1,000 different things. But as we think about, and from a strategy and planning perspective, it comes down to really building and defining what are those ICPs. Are we clearly on the same page, both philosophically, strategically, and objectively, about how we're going to define what are our tier 1 accounts, right? It's not 3,000. What is it? What are those key and strategic accounts? What are our tier 2, tier 3? And beginning to build our plan and our strategy, our growth goals, tailored around that fundamental understanding and definition as far as how we're defining our accounts, our personas within them, and how we're going to build an integrated plan to achieve our growth goals per segment. One of the things that, and this is a critical, is let's leverage our historical data, right? Nobody is closer to our clients and our customers, our prospects throughout this whole entire process than sales. When leads come down, sales are the teams that are involved with each individual involved in that buying process, each of those personas. They're working them. They understand their hesitations. What are their core challenges? When we win deals, when we lose deals, who's in those deals? So leverage that wealth of data to really help us kind of inform that ICP model and really hone in not only on how we really think about our accounts, which ones are closing, where do we have a right to win, what messaging is getting through, but also like as we think about who's in those deals. It's funny, we had one client that it was marketing always thought that, and we needed to market towards VPs. And the sales team, as we looked at historical wins and losses, almost the majority of the time when a VP was involved in a deal, they did not win, right? And so that's a perfect example of understanding that historical data that we see within the sales team to help really evolve that understanding. And this comes back to this final point, this feedback loop, right? What we should see on this left side is that marketing and sales has routine conversations consistently, not just as we need it. We need to have structured feedback loops as we set our annual plans, as we think about it quarterly. How are we performing against our pipeline? As we think about it monthly, what deals are moving up and through that pipeline? And weekly, as we think about tactics, heads up, what's working, what's not. These deals are coming through. Hey, sales, get ready. I'm about to, this customer just hit. So having that built-in structured feedback loops is absolutely foundational to not only build this kind of demand plan, but keep us on the same page throughout the process as we're beginning to execute against it.
Yeah, and Scott, I mean, these are great points. And as we think about these things too, and as we look at the survey data too, and the one thing I'll remind you is that the survey data was some of the largest companies. They're all probably Fortune 500 companies, right? So they're all large companies. So some of you might be sitting here saying to yourself, well, I'm a much smaller company. We do these things more ad hoc. It's a lot easier. But as you grow, like building that structure in place is going to be really key to make sure that you've got the forum to have this feedback put in place, because there's different types of feedback loops too, right? There's the data feedback where I've got my tools lined up, which is a challenge in itself, getting CRM and getting, lead objects to fix it, to sit with the opportunity objects and converting and all that fun stuff when it comes to CRM. But, there's that one piece of those feedback loops, but there's so much qualitative knowledge. There's so much tribal knowledge that exists that never makes it anywhere in CRM. It's living in sellers' heads. It's living in other places. And so having those forums where you're coming back and saying, and being able to mix the qualitative with the quantitative data to come up with the best answer together is really, really, really critical. And the only way you do that is by having these formal meetings and actually having objectives and those OKRs that come out of it that drive really the results.
Yeah, that's a great point. Yep. And it's the last thing I close on that point is it evolves everything, right? That feedback from sales helps us evolve the messaging, our targeting, every aspect around it. As we see, sales saying, hey, look, I'm having too many conversations around a specific topic that's really more educational, around a product or, a feature or functionality. That tells us, hey, maybe we need to elevate more messaging earlier in the funnel to improve kind of education around that feature set. Let's jump on to qualification. So as we look at qualification and we define this, one of the things that we saw, is again, less than 15% of kind of firms today are really using any type of more advanced kind of science-based approach as we kind of define leads. And so, that's a huge opportunity for us to begin to better utilize data, better utilize, analytics and historical information to kind of evolve and think about how we can build better automation, and better accuracy into how we define qualification. But one of the first steps as we kind of begin to tackle this is, to that earlier slide, is how do we unambiguously define each stage of the funnel? So many times we walk into companies and we work with clients, is one of the first stages is really kind of locking this down. Marketing doesn't just go from unaware to an MQL, right? How do we kind of begin to think about anonymous to known traffic? How do I match that against a target? How do I think about them and align them to a prospect and begin to move them through a more structured approach that helps us build marketing programs against that funnel stage, and locking down not only the stages, but what are the qualifying events, qualifications, metrics at each one of those stages. So we're aligned with marketing and sales and organizationally how people need to progress and how we need to move people through. A couple of the other aspects around that, as we think about and we talk about the building a model, thinking about it multidimensionally, right? Making sure that we match a fit, who these companies really look like, that ICP modeling. Engagement, how do we think about what are the right levels of engagement, and as well as an intent. An intent can take on multiple aspects, from an intent score, intent data, as well as kind of velocity metrics. How are they moving through and engaging with content? How many people are involved from an organization? So beginning to step back and think about those three different dimensions as we build those models, and begin to tailor those around your account modeling, right? So how we think about and move leads through for a tier 1 versus a tier 3 are going to be completely different. Another aspect of really is around defining and aligning that pipeline routing rules. And this is a critical one, right? Making sure that marketing and sales are on the exact same page, not only about these tiers and how we're going to score them, but how are we going to move people through it? What does the fast track look like? When do I need to move somebody and accelerate them through to sales? What are the SLAs between that? As soon as something happens, how quickly can I get that opportunity over to sales? And how does sales need to follow up with them? Making sure that we have right escalation aspects. If that lead isn't followed up on, how quickly can we make sure that that's escalated to a manager so that it can follow up, and rerouting rules. So just think about this is once we build all the pipes, making sure that all the rocket fuel of these opportunities and leads are flowing through those pipes in a correct way. Finally, making sure that we have clearly understood and defined ownership in handoffs.
Yeah, and I just say too, is to add, like, actually one of our senior advisors, Jerry Elliott, she's the ex-CRO of Cisco at Microsoft, IBM, a bunch of other companies as well. You know, she used the word, actually, she corrected me when I said handoffs the other day, and she actually said it's handshake, right? And so as we think about handshakes, like, how do we make sure that we are handshaking, when we're doing the marketing and sales handoff, like making sure that's truly a shake, that we're truly in agreement with what's coming across. And as Scott mentioned, like, the definitions are critical. I can't tell you when we get into our clients and you ask, it doesn't matter whether you ask sales or marketing to define their stages, everybody's going to give you a different answer, even if it's written down somewhere. Right? Because it's written down, somebody wrote it down somewhere, and then it was thrown in a black box somewhere and disappeared, and nobody ever pulled it out again, right? It's got to be constantly something that is being pulled back up and being brought back up and continuing to test. Same thing as Scott mentioned with the SLAs. We have clients of ours that actually what they started building in is SLAs, because we all know how fast and how important, like, the people's need to get response right away. When you know somebody's on your website, like when you want the information, you want it now. We have clients that would actually pull it from sellers if they didn't respond to it within a certain amount of time. So they've got tools that literally looks at the time. I handed it to you. You didn't get to it fast enough. I'm pulling it and giving it to somebody else. So like, there is a lot of different things that you can do there. That's really important. And I think it's probably a good segue into the next one, Scott, which is, as we think about the insights, because that handshake that you send, that data that you send over to marketing or from marketing to sales is critical. And the second that a seller doesn't trust that information, if it's one time, they throw it out and say, "Oh, I'm never going to trust that again." Right? And it's crazy to think that way, that people are like that, but we are like that. It's like, you show it to me one time, I'm going to take that as gospel. And so I have to constantly be building that trust and constantly have those feedback loops in place, so I can also see when the trust falls off. And so that way, as a marketing organization, when I see that something's not getting responded to, I can quickly go back to sales and say, "Hey, what's happened here?" And they'll tell you, it's like, "Hey, all of a sudden, I started getting a bunch of web forms that had Mickey Mouse at abc.com. And then all of a sudden, it's like, oh, you know what? We put a new web form up where we didn't have the checks and balances in there. And we've actually seen this for, very, very large companies where you don't have some of the most basics in place, where, hey, you can't put a 555 phone number in. You've got to have 10 digits in those phone numbers. So there's a lot of basic things that have to constantly be being done, because as you see from the stats here, most companies don't feel like most sales forces don't feel that we're getting the right type of information from marketing. So building that trust is really, really critical. And leveraging the analytics to provide those insights, the signals we were just talking about, and building those into the workflows. And there's a difference between data and insights. I think during the AIs, you guys, we've jumped from AI and now we're in the Gen AI space. We promised we probably would try to avoid Gen AI because I'm sure you've heard a lot about that today. But when you think about just when the AI bubble came about, it ended up turning into, I'm going to give sellers a bunch of data. I'm not necessarily giving them insights. I'm going to give them a bunch of data. And then what happens? We get stuck in analysis paralysis, and then we get dug in. We go deeper into the analysis to figure out what the insight actually is. So why are you actually giving me this lead? Why is this important for me to call now? And this goes for existing customers too, right? Why is this hitting my plate? All right, well, there's a potential for churn here. Here's why there's potential for churn. They've had 5 tickets open in the last 30 days that have gone unresponded to. Great, I better get on top of that. So involving those, so the last point there is evolving those insights and data views over time is really, really critical to make sure that I am eliminating that noise and not getting stuck in analysis paralysis.
Yeah, absolutely. I think you hit on a great point, is that it's, when we think about this, at the end of the day, this idea of data trust is absolutely critical. And one of the things that we talk about all the times, and one of my huge, challenges, is how do we get away from those vanity metrics, right? Making sure that if marketing achieves their goal, sales has to achieve their goal. We can't achieve our business goal unless, marketing and sales are both succeeding. When we walk in and we see clients where marketing achieved the goal, sales achieved the goal, but we still didn't hit a revenue goal. How is that possible? Right. That's
a perfect segue into the next one too, right?
Yep.
I think we might have lost Scott, but all right, we lost you there for a second, Scott.
Hey, thanks. Yeah, sorry. I just realized that one of my computers just shut down. So give me a second while I pull up.
Yeah, I'll keep going because I know we're just about out of time. But the last thing is we talked about that Scott was alluding to is the shared responsibility side of the house. So when we look at this, when you think about what organizations really think, less than 40% of sales leaders actually believe that we've got shared accountabilities in this case, right? And that's really, really important, right? Like, that also goes to the finger pointing and exacerbating that finger pointing between the two organizations. Because if one thinks they're doing a great job and the other one's not doing a great job, well, somebody's lying, right? Because we should both be killing it if we're both hitting our numbers. And so we've got to make sure that we get together and actually have the conversation and make sure that those two-way metrics are becoming something that is more commonplace. Because right now we see that they are becoming more common, but the majority of sales leaders still feel that they lack the mutual accountability. And that goes both ways, right? And marketing is going to say the same thing about sales. And so we got to have to make sure that we're eliminating those vanity metrics. We got to make sure that, as I mentioned before, is that we're coming with the quantitative and the qualitative data. Anecdotes are not helpful, right? When you come back and when sales says, well, we lost this deal, it's no different than saying we lost this deal because of this particular feature. Did we really lose it because of that feature? Well, maybe we shouldn't have been in the deal in the first place. I'll argue that maybe the discovery was bad, and that's all on sales. But like, at the end of the day, like, when you think about the qualitative data that you get and the feedback that you're getting from sales is always one thing, right? But you need to come with the data. So sales, if you want to change something that marketing is doing, you've got to come with your data, both qualitative and quantitative, and marketing has to do the same thing. And in order to do that, you've got to break down those silos. And so one of the things Scott and I focus a lot on with our clients is doing a lot of build, operate, transfers. And what that means is, you know what, at the end of the day, nobody likes to change what they're doing, right? Especially on marketing and sales, because they're worried about you're breaking the generating engine part of the revenue generating engine part of their company. So what ends up having to happen is like, well, then we need to pilot things and we need to prove that it's going to work first, right? So you've got to set up that agile piloting process between sales and marketing. So if marketing is going to go launch a new lead source, I should have a team on the other end that's going to handle it appropriately and make sure that I can hit the SLAs. And so that way you're going through and you're doing that test and learn culture and providing the feedback loop back. So that instant feedback loop. So that way, when you all of a sudden you launch a campaign and then you've got a bad web form and nobody knows about it for several days and you've just blown a bunch of good inbound leads, that shouldn't happen. So I've got to make sure that that we are doing those things. And ultimately, if we align those incentives and behaviors, you know, and we align that stuff, like if we align the incentives, the behaviors will follow, right? You've got crazy incentives on the sales side to incent certain behavior. There's no reason why we shouldn't be doing it on both sides.
Yeah.
I know, Scott, we got 1 minute left. So if you want to just wrap.
Absolutely. I think kind of closing, kind of, we can recap on these few points that we kind of ran through, right? We'll share the deck. But really, I think these 4 critical areas that highlighting, like, really, again, how we define and build an integrated demand plan, defining how we qualify opportunities through the process, making sure that we have good, clear, kind of shared insights, common data, and as well as kind of the shared responsibility. These are kind of 4 areas that we see that really any organization, any team today can start building better alignment between their teams. And, you know, when we see, these are just kind of a quick highlight of, you know, with a lot of our clients, you know, obviously customers and, you know, and accounts, you know, it depends on how large your organization is, the size of revenue. But to be honest, you know, we see pretty consistently these type of impacts on organizations when they begin to apply better kind of integrated teams and better kind of coordination between these marketing and sales organizations, you know, and it happens up and down the funnel, you know, right? From everything from 15 to 30%, you know, improvement in marketing efficiency and how we're executing, all the way up to, you know, 2 to 3 times better conversion and closing on our leads from a lead to close conversion rate. So that's it.